Peace, YouTube. This video is on how to add and subtract using negative integers. So first of all, let's define what an integer is. An integer is a whole number. Integers can be either positive or negative. What an integer is not is a fraction or a decimal. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are whole numbers. They are integers. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Those are whole numbers, integers. Now, there are 3 rules you need to keep in mind when you're adding and subtracting using negative integers. The first one, when integers have different signs, find the absolute value of both integers. Then subtract the smaller absolute value from the greater absolute value. Then you keep the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. And if you don't know what absolute value means, I'll show you in the example. Let's get started. Let's look at the example of -7 plus 9. Notice first off that they have different signs. This is -7. This is +9. Now we would try to find the absolute value of these two numbers. The absolute value of these two numbers. And what I mean by the absolute value, if you look at these bars here around the numbers, right? Those are signs for absolute value. And what absolute value means is how far a number is away from 0 on a number line, right? So looking at the absolute value of -7, how far away from 0 is -7. And so we could start at -7 on our number line here. 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units, 4, 5, 6, 7 units away from 0. And so our absolute value for -7 is 7. Again, our absolute value for -7 is 7. All right. And so now we're going to find our absolute value for +9. And so the same thing, the absolute value is how far a number is away from 0. And so we can start at 9, 1 unit, 2 units, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units away from 0. And so the absolute value for 9 or +9 is 9. And so mind you, absolute value is always going to be a positive number because it just means the distance from 0. So now we're going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the greater absolute value. And so what is the greater absolute value? The greater absolute value is 9. So that's what we're starting with. And we subtract 7 from 9. So 9 minus 7. 9 minus 7. And as we know, 9 minus 7 is 2. Now the last step we want to do is keep the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. And so which one of these had the greater absolute value? Which one is bigger? 7, absolute value of 7, or the absolute value of 9? 9 is bigger. And so 9 was a positive number. And so that means our answer is going to be +2. Let's try another one. This one is -9 plus 3, or -9 and a +3. And so we have different signs again. And so our first step again is to find the absolute value of both integers. Absolute value of both integers. So let's do that. Okay, here's our number line. And we want to find the absolute value of -9. So we're going to start, we could start from 0 and count over to -9. All right, how many units? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so the absolute value for -9 is going to be 9. All right. And then we want to do the same thing for +3. What is the absolute value for +3? We start at 0, 1, 2, 3. And so the absolute value for +3 is 3. Again, the absolute value for -9 is 9. And the absolute value for 3 is 3. Now, we want to subtract the smaller absolute value from the greater absolute value. And so that means we're starting with the larger number. And so that would be 9 minus 3. And what does 9 minus 3 equal? 9 minus 3 equals 6. And so the last step again is to keep the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. Keep the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. And so which one of these numbers has the greater absolute value? Well, we have negative 9, which has an absolute value of 9, and positive 3, which has an absolute value of 3. Negative 9 has the greater absolute value of 9. And so because this is a negative number, that means our answer is also negative. And so our final answer would be negative 6. Negative 9 plus 3 equals negative 6. Now, the second rule to follow is when you have a situation in which you are subtracting a negative integer, minus a negative, or two negative signs next to one another, look at the minus a negative as addition. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Take this problem, for example. 7 minus negative 9. So you have minus a negative. We're going to look at this minus a negative right here as a positive or as addition. So 7 minus 9 is the same thing. 7 minus negative 9, I'm sorry, is the same thing as 7 plus 9. All right. Minus a negative is the same thing as saying plus. All right. And what is 7 plus 9? Well, 7 plus 9 is 16. 7 plus 9 is 16. All right, let's try another one. What if we had 9 minus negative 3? And again, when we have this minus and negative like that, two negative signs or a minus and negative right next to each other, we look at it as a plus sign. And so we could rewrite this as 9 plus 3. And 9 plus 3, as we know, is 12. All right, 9 plus 3 is 12. The third rule when adding and subtracting using negative numbers is when you have a situation in which you're subtracting an integer from a negative integer, look at it as adding two negative integers. And I'll show you what I mean in the example. Here we have negative 7 minus 9. Negative 7 minus 9. And so when we have a situation like this, a negative number, and we're subtracting a number from a negative number, we look at it as negative 7 plus negative 9. When this is the case, we add the numbers together, negative 7 plus negative 9, just as we would like positive numbers. So what is 7 plus 9? 7 plus 9 is 16. In this case, negative 7 plus negative 9 is going to be negative 16. Negative 16. All right. Negative 7 plus negative 9 equals negative 16. Now, you also might see a little more complicated problem like this one here, where you have negative 9 minus negative 5. And so at this point, you would have to apply two rules in order to solve this problem. And so the first one you want to apply is you want to look at this minus a negative, right? And think of that as an addition problem. And so we would have negative 9 plus 5. Now that we have negative 9 plus 5, we go back to our first rule, which was when we have a negative number and a positive number, we want to find the absolute value of both of those numbers and then subtract the smaller absolute value from the greater absolute value. And so let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And so the absolute value of negative 9 is 9. And the absolute value of positive 5 is 5. Then we want to take those two numbers and subtract the smaller number from the larger number. And so that would be 9, that's the larger number, minus 5. And we know that 9 minus 5 equals 4. All right. But then that last step again, we want to look back at our uh, absolute values, see which one is the larger absolute value. And so negative 9, the absolute value is 9. And positive 5, the absolute value is 5. And so the larger absolute value is negative 9. And so that means that our answer is going to be negative 4. All right. Negative 9 minus negative 5 equals negative 4. I hope this video helps you to add and subtract using negative integers. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.